My name is Roger Pope, Principal of Kingsbridge Community College in Devon, and I'm chairing this debate this morning. I think they chose me because they took pity on me as being the only senior partner who hasn't got a knighthood or a damehood. So this is my kind of consolation prize. So if I can introduce the people here. Oh my goodness me, we have a knight on the end. So Alasdair Macdonald. Alasdair was head of, well, still is head of Morpeth School in Tower Hamlets. Very successful school, featured in Ofsted's 12 Outstanding Schools publication. And Alasdair is actually retiring after a very distinguished career in education at the end of this term. So welcome, Alasdair. And then Alison Peacock, who is the head of Wroxham Primary School. Alison took Wroxham from special measures and has had 2 outstanding Ofsteds following on from that. So well done, Alison. And she's also the leader of the national network from the Cambridge Primary Review. Then immediately on my right is Olmo Silva, who is the first ever researcher in spatial economics I have ever met. So welcome, Olmo. And Olmo's research looks at all of the issues to do with space around schools, so things to do with choice, with the effect of neighbourhood, accessibility, competition, and so forth. And then here we have Sam Freedman, who is now Director of Research, Evaluation and Impact at Teach First. Before that, Sam worked for the think tank Policy Exchange and was also perhaps best known to you as the special advisor to Michael Gove. So you're to blame then, Sam, is that? Yeah. And then moving along the line, we have Heather Flint. Heather is currently Education Advisor for United Learning. She was a head for 14 years and also a London Challenge advisor. And then John Coles, who is the CEO of United Learning, one very interesting academy chain which spans both independent and state sector. Previously, he was also at the DFE, Director General of Schools, and various other jobs before that, and a Director of London Challenge. How many education secretaries have you worked under then, John, when you were at the DFE?
I'll have to count. Come back to me.
Come back to you. Lots.
Quite a few.
Any good stories? You're among friends?
Yep.
Maybe later, but we'll pay. We'll have a wit round later, see what we can get out of him. And finally, on the end there, Bill Watkin, who is the Operational Director for Partnerships and Performance with the SSAT. Bill leads on academy leadership, both in terms of inducting new leaders and supporting them. So welcome to the panel. Our debate topic is, do academies help to improve teaching and learning? Is that the motivation for people becoming an academy? I mean, in my experience, a lot of people become an academy because they're told they've got to, or they were a converter academy and the head sat in his office and started doing the sums on how much he or she was going to cream off the LA, and when he found he had to take his shoes and socks off to get the answer, there was kind of no debate about it. So various motivations there. In the end, does it raise standards? Does it improve teaching and learning? Latest HMCI report told us that 25% of schools and academy chains were outstanding compared with 8% who were not in a chain, which seems to be pretty powerful evidence. So, do academies raise standards of teaching and learning? And if so, I think what we'd be really interested in finding out is how. So we're going to start off with 3 short statements from 3 of the panelists. Then we'll ask the other panelists to comment on those and add their own views. And then we're going to throw it open to the floor. So, Alasdair, you're going to kick us off.
Oh, thank you, Roger. Yeah, I mean, I find the actual topic slightly difficult in a sense, in that if we take it literally, do academies help improve teaching and learning, it would be pretty sad if they didn't. Whether they're academies or any other kind of school, I would hope that all schools help improve teaching and learning. So I assume we're not talking about this literally. We're talking about it in a slightly more figurative sense. I think a few points I would make. I think anything that generalizes at this level, do academies. We have, I don't know, over 2,000 secondary academies, and we have, which is a high percentage of the total. With primary schools, I think it's still less than 10%. I think when we're generalizing about that number of schools, again, I find that quite difficult. and certainly in the primary sector where they're a very small percentage. I have a problem too with causal relationships in anything to do with education, how you disaggregate what makes a difference. You know, was it becoming an academy that made a difference, or was it anything else? I'm not sure. So I do have some problems around the actual phrasing of the debate topic. And obviously, if all schools become academies, what then? We will still have the same mix of schools that we've always had. There will be some outstanding, some good, some requiring improvement, and some in special measures. So there's a kind of illogicality about this in some senses. I suppose, in a sense, the question is more like, does becoming an academy lead to improved teaching and learning? And again, how we measure that, I don't know, perhaps by the number of ones on Ofsted reports. Or are we actually saying, does becoming an academy lead to improved results? Again, not sure. I think my big issue with this is that, as Roger's just said, I'm retiring shortly. And in my career as a teacher, I've had familiarity with secondary moderns, grammar schools, comprehensive, CTCs, grant-maintained, specialist schools, academies, free schools, UTCs, and studio schools. I think they are all actually attempts by politicians to find structural solutions to improving the school system. I think very few of them, if any, are based on any genuine educational evidence. I think that there's this desire to find a magic wand, something that we can wave over the system that would dramatically improve all schools. And I think personally that the current obsession with academies is the most ideological of them all. I find it quite depressing that we have in our Department for Education a very large number of people employed to persuade people to become academies, to force people, to bully people into becoming academies. If it's such a wonderful idea, why aren't people flocking to do it? Why do people have to be bullied into doing it? I find that very hard. We've got these brokers all over the place who will turn up. I think it's part of an ideology which is about marketization. I don't think marketization is an appropriate model for schools. It might work for hamburgers. It doesn't work for schools, I don't believe. And I think it does, in my experience, pitch schools against schools. Just a couple more things, because I've only got a few minutes, Roger. The most frequently heard advantage of being academies, it seems to me, is this thing about autonomy. I've been a head teacher in Tower Hamlets for 21 years. I cannot remember the last time the local authority told me to do anything. And I think it's certainly a fairly open secret now that in some of the academy chains, actually, the head teachers have significantly less freedom and less autonomy because they're told in many ways what they have to do. I think I teach in Tower Hamlets. Tower Hamlets is one of the most improved local authorities in the country. Massive improvement. We have 1 secondary academy, 2 primary academies, and over 70 schools that are not academies. You don't have to be an academy to be successful. And for me, that's the problem. I think my problem with this is that we have an ideology which is being forced upon schools without the educational evidence to support it. I think what we should be focusing on, what does make a difference, is a focus on teaching and learning, irrespective of the type of school, and on good leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Alasdair. John, you wouldn't dream of telling the heads in your academy chain what to do, would you?
Well, there are some here, actually, so you probably should ask them. I try not to tell anyone what to do. And the answer to your question, I think, is 9 Secretaries of State, Roger. I've just been counting, but I may have forgotten one. Some were forgettable. I think to start in a similar place to Alasdair, I've spent my whole career trying to promote the idea that we do need to pay much more attention to the evidence in education. And I know of no absolutely compelling evidence in this country or anywhere else, that the legal structure of schooling has a direct correlation with the quality of teaching and learning which goes on within this country. It's one of those things where when you know who the researcher is who's done the piece of work, you pretty much know what conclusion they're going to come to. There's a group of right-wing economists who will basically tell you that autonomy and marketisation have an impact and will produce a piece of research which shows that, and you can find a group of left-wing sociologists who will argue the opposite, and that it has disastrous impact on equity. And when we've come to look at this over the years, or when I did look at this over the years in the department, it was very difficult to find pieces of research which I felt were unbiased, compelling, and answered serious questions about this topic in a way that was hard to argue with. So my view is that we can't be convinced that any one legal structure is going to provide the answer and on its own drive quality of teaching and learning. I think much more fundamentally important is the fact that for anybody who's in a leadership role in education, whatever structure they're working within, you face some significant choices. You face choices now about how do you lead teaching and learning in your school? How do you decide what it is that you'll focus on and prioritise? You face a choice about how will you work with your peers, whether or not you will collaborate with other school leaders locally and nationally. You face all of those choices. You face choices about how to respond to changing curriculum and qualifications. You face all of these difficult decisions and challenges. And one of the things that used to astonish me in the department repeatedly was the extent of compliance in the education system with what the Department for Education used to say. And I understand very well the reasons for that and why it is that people often felt they had to do what the government was saying. But the truth is, the government's tentacles don't reach as far as you might think. And certainly if you're sitting in sanctuary buildings, it doesn't feel like you've got a huge amount of control over what goes on in schools. So the extent of compliance always used to astonish me. And what people say to me quite often now is, well, education changes all the time, doesn't it? And on one level, that is obviously true. There's a huge amount of change going on of curriculum and qualifications. There's a huge amount of change which has happened, which has flowed this way and that with different secretaries of state and different political agendas. But if you really think about it, what employers or universities want out of the education system hasn't changed hugely at all over that period of time. And it seems to me that one of the things that we must do as an education system is have the confidence to do what we believe is right, to think hard about what young people today and in the future will need for their lives, what it is that we need to do to prepare them for a world of unpredictable change, and make sure that we prepare young people to face those changes, and to some extent put to one side, as best we can, a lot of the constant changing of policy that's going on around us. And coming from that back to the question, the one thing that it seems to me that academy status can give us, and can give groups like the one I work in the confidence and courage to do, is to do what we think is right, to set a clear sense of direction and vision for what is it that we believe, what is it that we stand for, what is the educational set of values, principles that we stand for, how will we work with other people, how will we make sure that we are constantly learning, innovating, being rigorous and disciplined in our approaches, collaborating with other people to learn and also to share what we're doing. It can give us the confidence to do that. It can also give us the confidence to say, if there are some changes that we don't like, we might just ignore them. Maybe we don't like the new curriculum that's coming out at the moment. So let's evaluate it. Let's decide for ourselves whether it's a good thing or not. And if we don't like it, let's not do it. And that seems to me a powerful thing. And now I'll stop. Thank you.
Good. Bring in Sam here.
Hello, everyone. Whenever you're announced as a former advisor to Michael Gove, you're always fighting against a wave of audience antipathy from the start. But I'll do my best. Many of you work or run outstanding schools and will have experience of politicians coming around to visit, policymakers coming to visit. And when they leave, I can tell you what they're all thinking. They're all thinking, how can I make every school, or how can we make every school as good as the one I've just been in? They're looking for Alasdair's magic wand. This is the biggest problem in education policy. Because the magic wand doesn't exist, because there's no way you can go back to your desk in sanctuary buildings, write down a list of 10 things that the school you've just been to does, send that list out to all the schools in the country and say, could you just do that, please? And hope that solves the problem, because it won't. The tentacles, as John says, don't stretch that far. And this is the problem that Andreas Leischer from the OECD calls the stickiness in education systems. In almost any education system, there's great practice. You will find patches of great practice. But he gets stuck. It's very difficult to move that great practice around the system and make it system-wide. And for me, the big benefit of Academies is that it helps with this problem. It doesn't solve the problem, but it helps with the problem. It means that you can get the outstanding schools, of course there are maintained schools that are outstanding, there are academies that are outstanding. You can get the outstanding schools, and you can get them into networks. You can build chains around those outstanding schools. You can get weaker schools into that network. You can get schools that simply want to benefit from being associated into that network. And then you can start to transmit good practice around that network, around that chain. As Roger said at the beginning, there is now emerging evidence that chains are perhaps the most successful form of governance structure, getting more outstandings. Robert Hill did some work for the National College, which again showed that they were doing better in terms of results than other types of school structure. And when you set those chains alongside other forms of networks that are now being built in the education system, be it teaching school alliances, be it organizations like Challenge Partners, you start to see the emergence of a school-to-school support system, a system-led improvement model, which gives real hope that you can start to reduce the problem of stickiness and get great practice moving around the system without it all having to come from someone's desk in Whitehall.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Let's take some comments from the panel, and then we'll come out to the floor. If we come along and ask you first, Alison.
Yes, thank you. Do academies help to improve teaching and learning? Well, I think it's professional courage informed by principles and evidence that improves teaching and learning, and I believe that through collaboration we're stronger. So whether we're academies or whether we're teaching school alliances or federations, I don't think that matters, but I do think the new way has to be about working together.
Thank you very much. I have to disclose that I'm an economist, so I'm going to attract even more antipathies than being Michael Gove's advisor. Do we always look at the data and know the answer a priori? Actually not. And in my history, I actually changed my mind quite a lot of time about what works and what doesn't work. I've worked on choice and competition, found no effect. I worked on faith schools and voluntary aided and foundation alternative school arrangements, found no effect. And then I happened to work on academies and found some effect. Some effect on what? Some effect on the school's ability to improve A-star to see GCSE's performance of their pupil. I'm predominantly thinking here, for those of you who attended my workshop before, about labor academies rather than the most recent conservative academies, simply because the data allowed me to tell you something about those schools. There is not much time series for us to analyze what is the effect of the current ways of academies and free school. So there is some evidence, and I think we should bring it to the table at this point, that some think that academies do seem to make a difference, and part of this, unfortunately, seems to be driven by the fact that because they have some leeways to select their pupils, some academies might improve in their standards simply by getting better pupils. Some of the improvement come through really raising the value added of their children, which is good to know. Unfortunately, there is also another aspect of what academies do, and they seem to be improving their overall performance table results or their contextual value-added results by simply pushing pupils that are already likely to do well in national exams a bit further up the performance ranking. They don't seem to be very effective at educating pupils that are weak and at the bottom of the achievement and distribution, whether you want to classify them as special educational needs children, free school meal children. And the question is, what can we do in order to address this shortcoming or this drawback of the system, potentially change the incentives that this school face, rather than assessing them on the basis of performance table that still put too much emphasis on level achievement, really move forward and put more emphasis on contextual value added. If I may add one last remark about this idea that academization or introduction of free schools in the system is just ideologically driven. It might be in this country, or that economists always see rosy views about quasi-market in education. It's not always the case. The counterpoint here is Sweden. It's not exactly a free market-oriented country. It's not exactly a right-wing country, and yet in the 1990s they introduced quasi-market reforms that brought free schools to the system. Even worse than that, schools that were allowed to make a profit out of running the education business, and guess what? They improved the performance not only of children that went to these free schools, but also of the public sector, the remaining schools in the Swedish market that responded to these competitive incentives that were generated in the system by the presence of free school by improving their standards. I don't know exactly what made the Swedish experiment work differently from the UK experiments, but it's not ideology that should drive us in thinking about whether academies can make a difference. It is much better to actually think about what kind of incentives autonomy and accountability can generate and how we can twist these incentives to cater for the weakest pupils, which are the ones where we should focus our attention.
Thank you. Helen.
Welcome.
Thank you. Well, as one of John's left-wing sociologists and an advisor, an education advisor for a chain of academies, I'm also a governor on a standalone academy in London, and I'm currently chairing the interim executive board of a maintained school that's in special measures, where we've just had 2 visits from our academy converter that Alasdair mentioned, telling us that our sponsor will be a local converter academy because the minister is keen on local solutions, and so we will be part of a multi-academy trust. Now, my view is that academies may improve teaching and learning. Some do, some don't. Some don't improve all teaching and learning. My experience tells me that the most vulnerable are the standalone academies, where they don't have to be part of the sort of school-to-school networks that you're talking about, Sam. And I don't think we can wait for those to emerge. I do think the kind of cooperation that schools can have, the challenge that schools can give each other, that healthy mix of competition and collaboration is what improves schools and improves the life chances of all of the pupils in them. And I think we should be talking much more about our education service as well as our education system, so that all of the structures in the school and between schools are coordinated and managed to ensure that all schools are the best. And I think at the moment we have what is potentially the worst of all possible worlds, with a mix of, as you're all very familiar with, maintained free schools, academy chains, standalone academies, and so on. And I think it's unhealthy, and it needs a coordinating principle driven by moral values to ensure that all our pupils get the best.
Thank you.
I think it's hard to approach this topic without making the distinction between sponsored academies and converter academies. Sponsored academies coming from a position of underperformance, charged with effecting a radical transformation of standards, may well have used academy status as a catalyst to change behaviours both in the classroom and out of it, whereas converter academies, often coming with outstanding judgments and extremely good exam results, were less interested in changes to pedagogy. I think it's much less around the academy status, the debate about improvements to teaching and learning at the moment, than it is about the changing nature of approaches to pedagogy. So, for example, we've got the emerging polarization of opinion about content and knowledge on one end of a spectrum and skills and competencies on the other end of the spectrum, and the former is growing ever greater in terms of its traction, and I think most of us sensible people would say that it's got to be somewhere combining all of them. And the second example I would give is about assessment and the use of the terminal exam as the default method of testing children, and I think that will have some implications for teaching and learning, probably far greater than academy status.
Okay, thank you very much to the panel. We now throw it open for questions and discussion from the floor. Thank you very much to all of those of you who slipped me a tenner during coffee time so that you'd be first in the queue. Much appreciated. Helen Salmon from Tavistock won the online auction for the right to ask the first question. Anybody else, would you like to kind of wave at me and we'll bring the roving mics over? Helen.
Thank you. It's refreshing to hear this received wisdom being questioned by some members of the panel, because I think that the obsession with structures has actually had a detrimental effect on some schools. Many academy chains and academies do very well, but it's not per se having that badge that makes for improvement. And I think it's been a diversion from core teaching and learning and the moral purpose of what schools are really about. I just welcome the panel's comment on that.
Okay, can we take sort of one or two more and then we'll come through? Sorry, I'm just peering through the lights. Anybody waving here who'd like to make a comment? Yeah, there in front here. And another one.
I think the whole question about academies is the wrong question. I think structures are the wrong focus, and a couple of people on the panel have talked about that. I think many people like a mixed economy because it gives freedoms, and I think what Sam was saying kind of is along those lines. But in terms of what works, I think moral purpose and a strong vision and a strong challenge is the right direction. I'm a chair of governors at a voluntary aided school in Lambeth, and we have massive challenge and vision from and with Lambeth. I'm also governor of an academy which is setting up a multi-academy trust in Guildford, and we're working with an independent school there, in fact one of John's schools, on our teaching school, talking about teaching schools. And again, strong vision, strong values comes through. Where you've got a group of vision-led professionals who want to change children's lives, you get very, very strong, what's the word? Energy coming from the people that you work with, and that leads to better outcomes.
Okay, can we take one or two more from the floor before coming back to the panel? Any more from the floor? No? Okay, panel. So two comments from the floor then, both saying, in effect, that it's not structures, it's about moral vision and purpose. Anybody like to pick that up? Heather.
I would agree.
Sorry, not Heather.
Sorry.
Alison.
Alison. I would agree. I think that what we need, though, is a sense of entrepreneurialism within the profession. We need more energy around what we can do, gathering a voice, being able to make a difference for ourselves. We've tended to wait to be told what to do, and although the academy, the nature of academies is supposed to be about freedom, I agree with Alasdair, we had that freedom already, but we don't tend to use it. So when we get groups of people together, as you're describing, who have a collective vision for what makes a difference for children, if that is nudged by becoming part of a chain, then that's the thing that's important, isn't it? But it could be by being part of a network like Challenge Partners. I absolutely agree, though. That's what we need to make a difference to our schools, moral purpose and vision.
Maybe else on the panel like to comment on.
make one comment. I mean, this must be correct, mustn't it? Great leadership, moral purpose, a sense of vision, some real values, and a real drive to improve quality, which embraces the whole group of professionals and all of the children that you're serving. That must be absolutely correct. What I think we've got to challenge ourselves on as a profession is some of what Kevin was talking about at the start. How do we use the evidence now to really drive through improvement? How do we collaborate with one another in this sort of forum to improve the quality of what we do? And how do we really take advantage of the space that there is in the education system? I passionately believe it doesn't matter very much what the structures are in the system. There is far, far more space for us to do what we believe is right than I think often we believe. I believe we can seize control of the education system and drive it forward for the benefit of the children. And we've got to use mechanisms like challenge partners to do that, whatever the status of the school.
What are the experiences from the floor? I mean, do we have people who think they haven't got much freedom and do feel constrained? Do we have people who are in a position where you actually want to stay with a local authority but you're being pushed into an academy chain? Do we have people who are fought to become an academy but perhaps haven't been able to? What are the experiences from the floor? You're being very passive on me. Any comments? Yeah, down the front here. Can we take another couple? What about the people at the back there? Don't stand up, sir. You might have to ask a question. And Helen over here afterwards.
Yeah, I suppose there's 2 points for me, really. I think as a school we felt we really had to go into academy status simply because the reductions in the funding the local authority prepared to put into the schools in that local authority meant that we were probably looking at redundancies had we not. So we felt we really didn't have any choice in that matter if we were to keep the staff we wanted to keep. That was our experience. I know experiences are different across other local authorities who perhaps got more support through the funding cuts. But I believe ours was really politically driven. It was of a certain type, our local authority, and had a certain drive towards what type of school they wanted to see, and they did that through the funding and redundancies. The point I suppose I want to make more is the biggest constraint I've found in the last perhaps 10 years of my teaching career, and it's spanned over 20 years plus now, is that you hang tied really by your outcomes. And so every time there's a change to your terminal examination system and what is seen as important, you change what you do. And a lot of your change is driven by that. And so if we firmly believe that one terminal exam, which measures an awful lot of knowledge and not so much skills, actually determines how good our students are and the future outcomes of their lives, then that's what we'd be driven to do with our teaching and learning, to make sure we get those outcomes, because at the end of the day, that's how we're assessed as well at schools. And so your moral purpose is tied up with the assessment criteria that you're expected to follow. And I think until those two things are balanced in a way where we can actually generate and develop perhaps better citizens alongside students who can, people who can take their place in society with the academic skills perhaps to move on to further higher education and the other softer skills to enable them to succeed through their lives. There's a lot of evidence to suggest those things are more important. Then there'll always be that tension. And schools, I think, are largely driven by the fact they need to produce those results that they're at the end of the day assessed on, and their students will get perhaps university places and we can all celebrate. And I don't see those things being equitable at the moment, personally.
Thank you. Could you just pass the microphone along to Helen in the lime green jacket here?
I'm a head teacher of a maintained school, and over the last 4 years we've taken the school from being a failing school to being recently judged by Ofsted as a good school, as a maintained school. I have to say working with Challenge Partners has been an enormous part of that progress that we've made, and there is no doubt about it that the networks that we've developed and working with other schools that are on the same moral journey, if you like, of improving what we're doing for our young people. On the 1st of August, we will be converting to an academy, and the governors and I chose to become an academy because we needed to do things differently structurally with the school. We needed a new build. We lost the BSF funding in the wisdom of the government at the time. And we know that we need new buildings, not because that will enable us to improve things for our students, because we've already got better results and we already have very good teaching and learning in the school, but because we need to be able to work in an environment that is makes us feel proud, makes us feel that we can manage what we're doing, and we're not spending so much of our funding, which is in very short supply these days, on the building. So there are other reasons sometimes for becoming an academy, and becoming an academy with a federation that has a strength that our local authority no longer has. And I think that's another important consideration. We went out to tender, if you like. We spoke to an awful lot of academy chains 2 years ago to find out which one was going to provide the best for our school. So we chose them, they didn't choose us. And I think that's something that we do need to consider as schools move forward and as the marketplace becomes a very open place. I think we've made the right decision. It's been a controversial decision, and there's been an awful lot of angst along the way. But I know that my school now has a secure future because we've got the economies of scale that belonging to a larger organisation brings. We've got the certainty of a new build, which will bring a new pride to the school going forward, and gives the school a future, which at one point we wondered whether or not it had.
Okay, so a couple of comments there around it being about the money, about being about networks, about being about assessment criteria. I think Alison wanted to come in there, and then we'll come on to you, Heather.
Sorry, I just wanted to say I think that makes an enormous amount of good sense, what you've done and the reasons you've done it and the thoughtfulness and the fact that you are able to become part of another group of schools that you will be able to work with. And I think if that pattern were to develop, then I can see, and local authorities could still be part of a fair admissions process, and then I can see a genuine progress in our education service emerging. I think my concern is for the randomness of it and the ad hocness at present, and that's you've just demonstrated how it doesn't have to be like that.
Alasdair?
Yeah, I mean, I think to some extent, you know, I think we as educationists have failed in the sense that we have allowed education to become such a political minefield, or battlefield really, for the parties. And I think in following on from what John was saying, I think we need to be much more vocal and much more vociferous and using the sort of evidence that Kevin's producing to say that actually, let's focus on the things we're talking about. I mean, I get quite irritated by the fact that at the moment, every single school that ever features anywhere in the Secretary of State's, when he talks, is always an academy. 90% of primary schools are not. You know, why do they not feature? Why does secondary school? But I think we need to be much more positive. You know, I think the fact that we roll over, the classic one in the secondary sector was EBAC. I thought the way we rolled over at that was just shameful. I think we should do what John says. We know what works, and we should be more powerful. And I think there's something potentially very powerful in the Royal College of Teachers. I think it's, you know, unfortunately the GTC didn't work for a whole load of reasons that were very predictable. But I think the Royal College of Teachers, I think, might mean us taking back some of the power from the politicians and actually saying, let's stop messing around with structures and let's start working with what we know does work, both within the classroom and in terms of collaboration between schools, irrespective of what kind of schools they are.
Okay, Olmo?
Hard to follow on that comment. I have the feeling that from some of the audience, it is clear that the ethos, teachers' motivation, and the moral conviction that teachers can do something different for their children is what is really driving change within schools. And the only thing I want to add to this is that, at least from my experience from talking to a number of schools that were academies, and specifically part of chains of academies, it seemed to me that this motivation, this ethos was promoted among teachers partly because by being part of a network where best practices were shared from one school to the other, and teachers had the chance of moving from being teachers to be vice head teacher, head teachers, or then being the flagship person that would move around from one school to the other as the person that would bring around and spread best practices, really transformed the teaching profession, which sometimes is unfortunately being blamed for everything and seen as a B-side, B-type profession, to something which is back again a profession in which people have some career path, have strong motivation, and they are finally brought back into the center spotlight because they are the ones that can make a difference for pupils. So it might be that academy chains have this extra side to it. It might be that we can reproduce this same arrangement within other networks that have nothing to do with academization, but I think this is something important to think about.
Okay, one final comment from the floor.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, you're on.
Hi, sorry, Ray Wims from Lambton School in Hounslow. I just wanted to pick up on something that John said earlier and other people have commented on. I just wondered whether you'd comment on, is it the dysfunctional high-stakes accountability structure, namely Ofsted, that is making us leaders so docile, or are there other reasons you think, or sometimes I just wish we were more French?
Ofsted, the big fat poisonous toad that squats on top of us all, squeezing the life out. Yeah, we recognise it well. We're running out of time here, so let's just take one final comment for the panel, John.
I've never previously been in a session of this sort where somebody has said, I wish we were more French. You don't wish we were more French, because in France, the tentacles of the education department really do run into the classroom in quite an extraordinary way. I do think our accountability system is a major part of what's driving some things that we don't really want. I think that is definitely true. And one of the things, very quick digression, because I know we've got to stop. One of the things that I found fascinating working with independent schools over the last 18 months is discovering how little attention they pay to a whole lot of things that government has said and done over the last 2 decades. And partly as a consequence of that, how very different teaching is in the classroom in quite a lot of independent schools. And I can talk to people in much more depth about this, but there is a much, much less a focus, particularly at GCSE, on what you need to do to achieve particular grade boundaries, what you need to do to hit particular benchmarks, etc., etc. And as a result of that, a science lesson feels like you're teaching science much less than teaching towards a very particular exam specification. And it's a visible difference, and anybody who'd like to visit our independent schools to see what I mean is very, very welcome. I'm not arguing it's better. I think there are a huge number of strengths in our academies which are absolutely superb. You see fantastic pedagogy, but you do see constraint driven by the accountability system and the huge pressure of league tables on practice in the classroom. And I think it is back to the point a colleague was making earlier about the way that assessment drives practice very, very powerfully, exam specifications in particular. And I think for the best of reasons, I'm a great believer in accountability per se. I think it's hugely important. I don't think our accountability system is where it needs to be to promote the sort of qualities that actually I think all of us in this room, and probably most politicians as well, would see as absolutely fundamental for the future.